On piece E, mark the grain of your fabric. Line the grain of your fabric with the center front and center back of your hat top. Lay it down, and you'll see which way the grain goes. You'll want to pin in the center back and then the center front. Keeping it smooth. Don't pull the top too tight or it'll warp your foundation. Smooth the fabric from left to right and pin on the sides, the left and the right. Continue pinning, alternating from side to side, keeping the top smooth. Be sure that you don't pull the fabric too tight or it will warp your foundation. Once you have it completely pinned, then you're going to stab stitch just under the wire, but through the side band. You're going to stitch just through the band. I'm stitching in contrasting thread so that you can see what I'm doing. Make sure that it's under the wire, but close enough to the wire to hold it taut. In order to smooth the side seam allowance down, you'll need to clip the side edges up to your stab stitching. Unless you're using very heavy fabric, it should lay flat after just clips. If your fabric is very thick, you may need to cut notches. Clip all the way around. Once you've clipped all the way around the hat, then you'll want to trim that extra seam allowance in half so that you don't have as much bulk around the top edge. So now that you have your top covered, we're going to take your long piece of fashion fabric that's cut for your side band, E, and mark one of your edges at 5/8 of an inch all the way down. This is one of the long edges. So right sides together. So I'm going to put the right sides like it's inside out around my frame, like this. You want it to fit fairly tight, but not so tight that you won't be able to tuck the seam allowance in. So find the nice center and put a pin for the top and a pin down at the bottom. Now you want it to be snug, but you don't want it to be warping the shape of your hat. So what we're going to do is take this off. Because this is on the bias, it will stretch a little bit. So now I have what should be my center back seam, but you can see that it's kind of pinned a little crooked. So get a ruler. So now you're going to get a ruler and straighten out that seam so you can just mark it. I'm going to move my pins so then I can take this over to the sewing machine. I'm going to stitch right down here. Make sure you back stitch at both ends. So now that I've straight stitched it across where I had marked it, take out these pins. Now if you have extra heavy fabric like I have, you might want to trim this seam allowance down. So let's trim, I'm going to go ahead and trim mine down a little bit, just so that it's not so bulky on the inside of my hat. Okay. So now go over and press the seam open so that it's nice and flat on the outside. So now what we're going to do, now that we've pressed our seam open, we're going to turn it right side out. And we're going to slip it back over our base. Find your center back again. And pull it down so that you have just the right amount of seam allowance hanging off the bottom. So make sure it's kind of even all the way around. And then you'll see that we have this top that's kind of just sticking up. Now what we're going to do is fold that down in on itself. Make sure that you're lining right up at the edge there. If you're finding it's difficult to get this to turn in, if you take a pen or something smooth, you can work that in. When you get to the seam allowance, you spread that seam allowance back out so you have the least amount of bulk. Okay, so now I have the crown of my hat. Now what we're going to do is we're going to slip stitch right in here. Now if you remember, a slip stitch is a very invisible stitch, so you want only one thread, not one thread. You want to make sure you don't have anything sticking out, so clip it. I'm going to start in the center back. Work it so that my knot is hidden down inside. Now if you remember, all it is taking, I'm going to take a little prick stitch in this side, and then I'm going to travel through the tunnel out here, and then right across, so directly across from where I came out, I'm just picking up the fashion fabric. I'm going to take a prick stitch, very small stitch, and I go directly across back through the fold. And you want your stitches to be small enough that you're not going to get any strange pulls. There shouldn't be any real tension on this seam. You just want it to be nice and smooth. So prick stitch in the hat part, back over, travel through the fold. And then just complete that all the way around so that you have a nice smooth seam like this. Now you want to make sure that when you're stitching it, that it's right at the edge of where the wire is. You don't want to get down in here, because then you'll have a seam that looks like that. What you want it to do is to be invisible from the front. I mean, very few people are going to see you from the top of the hat. So you want this to be on the top edge, right at the wire. You're not going around the wire, you're just picking up the fashion fabric. Okay, so do that all the way around.